Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us for this live conversation about the situation in Syria. I have a few people already online today. Please, if there's any technical issues, let us know and we will resolve them as soon as possible. First of all, I would like to thank the guests, and while we are speaking, more guests should arrive. I would like to say that we as the Yazidi community will never forget the actions of the SDF when they came to support our community in 2014. Okay, I understand that we have some technical issues. I'm going to ask Sardar to please support. If you give us a few moments. DR, I want to let you know your camera is off. I'm not sure if you can hear me.
Yes. Hi, everyone. I do hear you.
Okay. Okay, 1 second as we just confirm that everyone can hear us. Okay, I think everyone should hear us now. First of all, welcome to our guests. Let me just make sure that everyone is on the screen right now. If you are online and you are not able to hear us, please let us know. Nadine, can you make sure that, yeah, we can hear you.
Great. Okay.
Okay.
Awesome.
Okay, maybe the speakers can start by introducing themselves. Mutlu, why don't you go ahead and give a quick introduction? Mutlu, can you hear me? Murad, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, but just give me a minute. I'm in
Okay.
the airport trying to find a place.
Nadine, please go ahead.
Quiet.
Sure, I'll go ahead. Nadine Mayenza. I'm the former chair of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, co-chair of the Earth Roundtable, the Religious Freedom Roundtable in Washington, D.C., a couple other roles that I have, and fortunately friends with a lot on this call today and a lot of people on the ground right now in Syria. So I'm really encouraged to be able to have this conversation, even as I'm troubled by the situation on the ground.
DR, maybe you can also give an introduction.
Hi, everyone. My name is DR. I'm Udao Media Network correspondent to Washington, D.C. I'm covering White House.
I don't know if you can hear me, but Perry, I cannot hear you. I cannot hear anything.
I'm covering the United States foreign policy towards
Yes,
Middle
but
East.
I cannot hear the broadcast. I cannot see hear. My speaker is on. Maybe I left and came back, but still, let me try again. If you hear each other, then the problem is with me. I don't know if you hear each other. You hear? Okay, then maybe it's, let me just exit again once more.
I think I've introduced myself.
Yes, Murad, you want to go ahead?
Yes, hi everyone. I don't know if my video is okay, but I am speaking from the airport going to Iraq for also important session. which is going to be on the security of Iraq based on the situation that's happening. But my name is Murad Ismail. I'm a member of parliament in Iraq and a Yazidi activist.
Thank you. And as we go, more people will join us. I see Mutlu has joined. Mutlu, can you hear us now? No? Can you hear us? Okay. Unfortunately, Mutlu is unable to hear us right now. I would say let's start. I want to start off by saying that we as the Yazidi community will never forget the actions of the SDF when they came to Sinjar in 2014 and helped our community when we were under genocidal attack by the Islamic State. Their actions were heroic and they saved our community. And it's very sad to see that after vigorous efforts to defeat the Islamic State, the international community has wrongly decided to side with Damascus, with the Syrian president, and stand by as re-headed ISIS and Al-Qaeda members commit the same sort of atrocities, this time against the Kurds, the Yazidis, the Christians, and others in northeast Syria. We, as the Free Yazidi Foundation, we are particularly tracking the Yazidi families in Afrin and Aleppo and the Northeast. And I would characterize these families as under immense threat of extermination. And the silence of the international community, largely due to the ongoing conflict in other parts of the world, is deafening. And Syria does not make even a front page news on the news channels or international newspapers, which is very alarming. We're watching thousands and thousands of ISIS prisoners be let out by the Syrian army. This is sickening, especially for my community, who has suffered immensely. And until now, there hasn't been much of justice and accountability. What we see is impunity. Perpetrators are getting away with the crimes they committed against our people. I would like to say that I want to express our solidarity with the residents of the Northeast who are currently under assault by what we say, a terrorist state. We always say that what Baghdadi wanted to achieve and he couldn't, Jolani al-Shara is at this moment achieving. There is an actual Islamic state currently, and that is Syria. Murad, you as a member of the Iraqi parliament, I mean, you've seen it in 2014, you started as an activist, you're now a member of parliament. Tell me your point of view of the situation in Syria.
I mean, I would say definitely feeling devastated personally to see this be the end of a very long journey for the Syrian people, especially for the people of the North and the Northeast. These people have sacrificed, as you all know, more than 12,000 Syrians on the SDF, mostly Kurds, died for all of us, so that ISIS does not make a state in that region. And to see this outcome where the international community and especially the US turn their back on them, I think this will go down the history as probably one of the most significant strategic mistakes by the US government for many decades. To turn your friend to your enemies, to be massacred, and to potentially face a genocide. I think that's not the values, of anyone, especially the U.S. values. As people, as you know, also I'm a U.S. citizen. Iraqi U.S. citizen. I live in the U.S. for almost 17 years now. I never felt this way about the situation. I feel something similar when that happened to Afghanistan, but this is kind of the second biggest hit to me emotionally, where the United States plays its cards in a very wrong way that helps basically create a radical regime in a region that is diverse. As you know, Syria is one of the most diverse countries. What we have now, an Islamic state, as you said, it is not a modern state, it's an Islamic state. It also does not have really any anything really that you can hope that's going to be better. Of course, none of us were happy about Assad. None of us were happy about anything that was happening in Syria. But to have a replacement be an Islamist regime that's also a dictatorship, you're basically replacing one dictator with another dictator, a terrible one with another terrible one. And that's not something that the Syrians, I believe, neither the Sunnis or the Alawites or the Druze or the Christians or the Kurds or the Yazidis or anyone in Syria work for that. So this is really a big strategic mistake. And I think why it happened, for US to go and manage its policy from Turkey, which basically have very long objectives in Syria that have worked very hard. And actually, they did not work very hard this time. They delivered all their, basically, they got everything they wanted in Syria without shooting a single bullet, without spending a single dollar. They just had Tom Barak in their back that blindly delivered Turkey a solution that Turkey wants, not the US wants. I don't believe the US public wanted this. I also don't believe the US policymakers wanted this. Not even Trump administration or Trump himself. I think what happened is the money that got funneled into the Syrian file with the lobbying basically blinded everyone in the US, and they kind of just gave President Trump a few sentences that Shara is strong, is handsome, he's not a chore boy, and he can fix Syria. But nothing beyond that. Like if even as an American, if you think about it, Giuliani was in Iraq killing Americans. Hundreds of Americans from everywhere were killed by Al-Qaeda. Yazidis were killed, 1,000 Yazidis were killed by Al-Qaeda back in 2007 when Giuliani was in Iraq delivering terrorism to the people. So I don't believe also the Sunnis wanted this outcome. The Sunni community in Syria suffered greatly, as you all know. Assad was terrible the way he did it, but I really don't know. I think the world is collapsing in order. As an order, the world is collapsing. I think the international law is collapsing. And we used to go to the US when something happened to minorities. And this time I did not go to the US. I'm very upset. I really don't want to go to the US asking for help for anybody, because I don't think the US government is positioned today to stand for anyone. I don't think the US government is positioned to stand for minorities. I think the Kurds have supported the US for many years. And, the Kurds, the Yazidis, the everyone, minorities, they are good friends to the US. And for US to turn their back on them, I think just says a lot for what's going to come next. I'm very worried about the future, of course. I think it will be very hard for anybody from the minorities, ethnic or religious, to live under the current Syrian regime. And I think Syria will descend into civil war eventually, and US would have to leave. That's also very ironic. For example, the Tom Barak and his people have been campaigning for years that Turkey and Syrian government will take over ISIS prisons or prisoners. But they did not take them over. They are handing over the prisoners to Iraq. So, well, okay, if you don't trust them, why you are asking the SDF to go integrate to them if you don't trust them to handle 7,000 ISIS members? So it's really, I think, US itself does not trust the Syrian regime. They don't trust what's going to come next in Syria. But this is basically just turning down a house that you built for 20 years. You spend billions of dollars as US. People give their lives in the region, but you just destroyed it without a future. With a future, there is no future for Syria. I think Syria will descend into civil war eventually. It will be very hard to believe that the Kurds and others who are well armed and who are good fighters can they just accept integrating into a country without any rights, without any power. Just basically accept the facts as they are. So this is really a terrible day, I think, for the Middle East. It's a terrible day for all of us. It's a terrible day in terms of the justice too. ISIS members have been in prison for 11 years without accountability. And now what happened, they're just turning them over to Iraq. And Iraq does not know what to do with them. Iraq is going through financial breakdown. Iraq is going through the geopolitical breakdown, given the issue with Iran, with Syria. And I think Iraq as a state, I really doubt, or I would be very surprised if Iraq can navigate these changes in the Middle East without collapsing again as in 2014. Thank you.
Thank you, Murad. And I see we have a lot of viewers right now. And so maybe it's a good time to just just take a step back and see what is going on, who is who. And so just for those viewers who do not have an understanding of the Middle East, I want everyone to know that, like, Al-Qaeda is the terrorist organization that was led by Osama bin Laden and those responsible for the 9/11 attacks in New York. And shortly after that, a young terrorist from Syria who took the name Abu Muhammad al-Jolani pledged allegiance to Al-Qaeda and traveled to Iraq. Jolani was a member of Al-Qaeda in Iraq and was eventually captured by the U.S. military forces in Iraq, spending several years in U.S. detention there. When he was released, he eventually returned to Syria. However, he remained an Al-Qaeda member, and he was tasked with leading Al-Qaeda in Syria. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi was leading Al-Qaeda in Iraq. Eventually, Baghdadi transformed Al-Qaeda in Iraq into the Islamic State, ISIS. Jolani decided to remain with Al-Qaeda, renaming it Jabhat al-Nusra and later Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. ISIS and Jolani's group fought each other due to disagreements. Nonetheless, Jolani was listed as a terrorist by the United States and Europe, and the US government had a bounty on his head up until recently. So in late 2024, Jolani's HTS terrorists conducted a campaign against former Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, toppling his regime, and he began wearing a suit and ties instead of military fatigues and began calling himself Ahmed Shara. He is the current president of Syria. So I hope you're following me. Al-Qaeda member, now president of Syria. The new Syrian military, this includes former ISIS member and Al-Qaeda members and a variety of militias with lengthy histories of committing horrific violations, unspeakable crimes against Alawites, then against the Druze, and now against the Kurds, the Yazidis, and the Christians. There is a massive disinformation campaign to blame these conflicts on the victims. But the truth is that this government, from the leader to the fighters, is an extremist government. That's why I say it's a Islamic State, extremist Islamic State, that the one that Baghdadi was always envisioning has now been reality. And so on behalf of FYF, I am stating my view, and that is, in fact, an Islamic State. Even if they do not say it out loud, it is. They've achieved what they wanted. They have tried to fool the world, but the actions in Syria show the truth. This is a terror regime, and we have an incredible amount of speakers today. So Nadine, I would like to go to you. I'm sure you have a lot to say. Give us your view.
The Northeast is the only part of Syria that has had no sectarian violence, no minorities that have been targeted, and it could have been. They wanted to integrate into Damascus in a way that preserved those remarkable religious freedom conditions that have been covered by numerous organizations well before I started. So here was this opportunity to take the Northeast and integrate them into Damascus, keep the local police, keep the local councils or local people in those positions, integrate them in a way that was peaceful, that if anything, had they integrated in that way, do you know, fireworks would have gone off all through Syria, just like after the March 10th agreement. All of Syria would have celebrated that they integrated in, and it would have made Syria stronger and more stable. Instead, the Syrian army went against the Northeast militarily with the support of Turkey, and with the U.S. not stopping it. And at this point in time, these ceasefire agreements have really been demands to surrender. What we don't want to see is these Syrian security forces that, as you mentioned, we've seen massacres against Alawites, against Druze, and now against Kurds. We've seen beheadings, we've seen executions. I mean, all of you have shared videos of that. So here are these Syrian security forces from HTS, foreign fighters, Syrian-backed, Turkish-backed Syrian National Army, that some of them sanctioned by the U.S. for their crimes against minorities, including Yazidis. Here, they're coming into the Northeast. And I think at this moment in time, the international community needs to say, stop. They should not enter these minority areas, because these Kurdish majority areas are filled with Yazidis, Christians, Zoroastrians, all sorts of different religious and ethnic minorities. The U.S. and the international community should say, stop, and and integrate them in a way where they keep local representation and local security. It's the only way they'll be safe. And I think the precedent here for what happens right now is also going to be looked at in Sueda. And so at this point in time, the U.S. Under Ambassador Tom Barrack has really had no interest in integrating them in that way. He has wanted them to open their doors and let the Syrian government just take over. And I've been up in the Valley of the Christians near Latakia, up in the mountains, and I visited Christian villages. And what I found is every mayor was from Idlib or HTS. And as I started learning more and more and checking with different areas, we found that throughout all of Syria. So instead of having mayors from their local community, they have mayors from the HTS and from Idlib. And even the new mayor of Raqqa, I understand he's from Aleppo, but I'm sure he's part of HTS and obviously spent time in Idlib. And so I even found out the municipal buildings in the Christian areas, all the Christians had been removed from their jobs when al-Shara took over, any of that were in the government, and they've been replaced with people from Idlib. So what we're seeing is a centralization that's being run this way, almost as the Salvation government that was the government in Idlib is now kind of over all of Syria, and these Syrian security forces that are inconsistent at best, but obviously many atrocities have come from the very people that were supposed to be protecting Syrians and committing these crimes. And I think at this moment in time, it's important that Congress and the international community, the UK, where I was able to brief the Foreign Office just a few days ago, and other places right now say stop and really ensure that these communities do not have to, Yazidi villages, Syrian villages should not have Syrian security forces protecting them. It's a recipe for disaster. We're just going to see more atrocities, and it's opening this space that is allowing ISIS to rise again, extremism to rise again. In the Northeast, they had filled those governance and security gaps that were created when ISIS was eliminated with governance, and that's why they've had the peace and stability in the Northeast that they've had. And now we are seeing ISIS and extremism rise again. Obviously, we've all seen the flag over Raqqa, the ISIS flag that was put up. I'm sure it's down again, but it just shows you the kind of ideology so many of these fighters have. And this is a recipe for disaster. And this is not in line with what President Trump wanted for Syria, what he was successful in Syria. So I'm not sure Ambassador Barack has served him well, and I'm not sure he knows that. But what has happened now is violence, instability, and if we think that financial prosperity is coming to Syria as they're committing atrocities against their own people, I don't think we'll be seeing that. And so there's a different way forward. There's still time for the U.S. and the international community to step in. And I think that's why it's so important, Apari, that you're having this conversation, that all of you that are following, please keep retweeting what you're hearing, keep pushing, call your member of Congress, call your own government officials if you're in a different country than the United States, and ask them to speak into this as well, because I think that's the only way we're going to have the kind of pressure to stop them from continuing to go in.
Thank you, Nadine. And we just showed a video of the ISIS flag being raised above Raqqa. It is confirmed that this is a recent video. That is actually horrible to see. DR, I wanted to go to you. You've been lately in the Congress, in the White House, trying to get some sort of commitment from the U.S. government to see if they are going to do something for the Kurds in Rojava and other minorities. Can you give me your view?
Yeah, thank you so much, Puri. Actually, the recent attacks targeting minority communities in Syria by the Syrian affiliated groups or even by the Syrian Arab Army are horrific to me and to all the people who are covering and getting the right information on the ground. But we know that there is a limited coverage media, and this has escalated concerns over civilian protection and accountability. Even some of these violations have been publicly acknowledged by the Syrian government and the Syrian Defense Ministry. They pushed a statement and they said that they have founded these violations and they are going to investigate. I'm not sure if they are doing it, which they've said for Sueda and they said for Latakia, and they're saying it now for Rojava and northern Syria. But despite this awareness, despite this, we see that I've been in the Congress from the very beginning, we see that the awareness in Washington remains very limited, especially in the Congress, from both houses. I've interviewed many members of Congress. I couldn't publish it, all of them, because many of them said that we are not aware of this. Please reach out to our staff or our office, and we will look
DR,
into
if you can put your video on, nobody sees you.
Sure. Yeah, I've reached many of them, and I couldn't publish it, their interviews, because they were just saying that we are not aware what's happening in that region. But I've noticed that very few members of Congress and staffs appears to have limited and partial information about what's going on the ground. And this, that it advances that the members of Congress have not been briefed even about the U.S. foreign policy and the U.S. policy that now the U.S. ambassador to Turkey and U.S. special envoy to Syria are undertaking, which even someone like members of House of Foreign Relations Committee from both sides, they were not aware that what's the U.S. policy towards this region. So the lack of comprehensive briefings, I think, has constrained informed Congress engagement, and of course, it has impacted on their actions towards this. But now we see that the peoples from the Congress and members of the Congress are appearing that they're getting more information and they are aware that what's going on in the region. But yesterday, what I was noticing when I interviewed Congressman Joe Wilson, one of the staff members, and it's appeared on the video that I interviewed him, she was very unsatisfied by my question, which my question was just that you are a member of Congress, are supporting the minorities in Syria and covering Syria for a long time. Do you aware about the recent developments in Syria and attacks on the Kurds and minorities? And she was just visibly rejecting my question. And it was just a simple question. And later when I said, what do you say for the rights of the minority and the Kurds? She was dragging him and didn't let him to speak. This is what I read. I think that the staff members, some of them, not all of them, they are not trying to brief them the right information. I don't want to accuse them. I don't want to say that why they are doing it, but I saw this myself yesterday. And after that, she came to me and said, SDF is killing the Kurds. And that was surprising to me, why she's telling me this. And for the rest of the members of Congress, I think now they are getting some information. And from the Senate side, especially senators like Lindsey Graham and Senator Van Hollen and the other people, Jim Risch, the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, they are trying to have some sort of debriefing from the administration to brief them that what's the U.S. policy, why the U.S. is abandoning their allies in the region, what's the risk of releasing all of these ISIS prisoners, why the United States is transferring ISIS detainees to Iraq, not keeping there. And I've been confirmed by one of the officials from the State Department that the U.S. is planning to announce the full withdrawal in Rojava. And the Congress have not been briefed on that. And this would raise a serious question about the stability on the region and the stability in that region. So, and from the administration, I've tried to reach and ask everyone from the administration, from the Department of Defense, from CENTCOM and the State Department. I'm asking them questions, but I'm getting nothing from them. That they are either referring me to what the public statements that Ambassador Tom Barrack is pushing on Twitter or on their social media, but there's no clear information about what's the U.S. policy towards why they are doing it. Are they abandoning the Kurds? And I've been in the White House. I asked President Trump twice on this. The first time I was when there were an attack on Aleppo, 2 Kurdish neighborhoods, and he was saying that he wants this war to stop it. And for the second time, I'm asking him about the Kurdish rights, and it means that I talked to some people that they told me even President Trump is not briefed with the right information. And we all hear what he said publicly. I don't want to repeat his words. But I see that now there are journalists and media outlets are reaching out to me because you see that I'm very active on Twitter. I'm trying very hard to fight the misinformation and disinformation.
Exactly. This has been a huge problem.
And it is a huge gap of information, and the information gap has been compounded with this disinformation, and that impacts on the U.S. policy makers and at the same time the people from the Congress. That's why it's very crucial and important that the members of the Congress and the members of the administration are getting the right information. Not everyone are aware of what's going on the ground. And the media in the United States, in Washington, they are not paying attention. I don't blame them for this because there is a lot of going on in the world. They are too much occupied with what's going on with Greenland, what's going on with other parts of the world. But at the same time, this is very risky. And I think it's worth it to pay attention to it because it will leave a huge implication on the US foreign policy in that region. I think the United States, if they are not taking action now, there will be a huge consequences for the US national security interests in that region. Just imagine how many US companies are investing in that region. How many US companies are planning to go to Syria? And
I think also just in general, we have seen in the past that it flows over to the other countries in the Middle East. So it never sticks to one country only, right?
Lastly, what I would say that if they are not paying attention to this, if they are not taking an action immediately, I think there will be a huge price that it will make the U.S. national security in that region fragile and very risky. Not even for the U.S. military, but for the U.S. investors.
Yeah, we know that national security is important for this administration, so I am glad that you brought this up. I want to go to Vladimir because, Vladimir, you are on the ground. Please, I can't see you right now. Maybe you can turn on your camera. Give me your point of view.
Do you have a specific question, or just in general you want me to talk a little bit about what happens on the ground? Or
talk to me about what happened for the viewers. Talk to us. What happens on the ground? What do you see? What is your opinion?
Well, I mean, I'm not in Syria now. I was there for 3 days. I mean, it's very different from what I used to know the area. So it's like completely militarized. There's checkpoints everywhere, electricity blackouts, problems with internet. And people are very afraid, like a lot of Kurdish civilians, they don't, I mean, you have this Kurdish decree of the Syrian interim government. But if you talk to people, no one believes in this. Like they think just if the Syrian interim forces will enter the Kurdish cities, there's going to be massacres and killings and they have to flee. And I know that there's a lot of advisors that are helping the government in Damascus to shape their campaign. So they always say like, oh yeah, you have to take care of human rights and you have to respect Kurds. So I remember there was a video of one Arab tribal member that captured some SDF fighters. And he was saying, yeah, they're like, he captured them and he was basically saying like some bad stuff. And they would say, yeah, but they are good, they are Kurds. So there's like a big instruction also to these forces to basically show themselves on the good side. But then, of course, there's a lot of videos and everything that doesn't come out because it's not on the camera, because they get instructions to not film this kind of things. So I think there's a lot of disinformation, and also what often they try to do is saying this is like the problem is SDF and PKK. We don't have any problem with Kurds. So this is like a directly narrative imported from Turkey that, oh, we don't have a problem with Kurds and we're going to give them some language rights and then we're going to impose like some form of a security state on them. I mean, this is not gonna really, if you enter the border, if you enter Rojava or northern Syria, whatever you want to call it, the first thing you see is like a lot of Kurdish flags, KDP flags, PKK flags, everything. I mean, in the past, actually, you didn't see a lot of Kurdish flags because the SDF doesn't like this particular flag. But that's completely different. Everywhere it's Kurdish flag only. Kurdish flags, SDF flags, everybody shouting, long live the Kurdish resistance. So I think also there's like Ahmad Shara, Jalani, or whatever you want to call him, he united the Kurds. There's a lot of Kurdish cross-border solidarity. Every day there's Kurdish volunteers crossing into Syria to help out. And I think there's this narrative of that it's just about PKK and SDF. I don't think people buy it on the ground if you talk to people. And also I don't think, because there was all this thing then when the Damascus announced that, oh, there's this Kurdish decree and now all the Kurds are happy. I mean, there were like some Kurds in Damascus and Afrin, there were some people that were like celebrating. but I can assure you that nobody's celebrating in Kamishlo or in Derik, and also, I mean, it doesn't mean that if they're celebrating that they do it out of a voluntary will, because you also have to realize that there's people working for the government in Afrin, and they probably were also asked to go in the streets. And I think the situation is quite dire, and like people are afraid. And I think also that people don't realize that this could cause similar refugee waves, what we have seen in the 90s with when the Iraqi Kurds were being slaughtered by the Ba'ath regime and they were fleeing to the Turkish and Iranian border. I think if this is accepted to continue, you're probably going to see people fleeing to either trying to cross the border of Turkey, or they will try to go over the border of Iraqi Kurdistan. And so far, no one is prepared for that. In Iraqi Kurdistan, there's no preparation for that if that happens, because both the self-administration and the KRG, they don't want really the Kurds all to immediately leave, because then the demography of the area changes. But at the same time, people are really, really afraid. And I know that initially the Syrian government or Damascus, they were planning actually to cut the access to the Samarkand border. But basically they delayed that plan because of this so-called ceasefire talks. And there's a big risk that there will be some excuse that they're going to use to attack again. And really people are like so afraid. And even if you go to those Kurdish, there's like sort of this Kurdish solidarity welcoming when these Kurdish volunteers cross all over these Kurdish towns. Like a lot of people don't want to talk on the camera because they're afraid there could be repercussions. And I think what they're afraid of is that in the case, for instance, Damascus takes over those areas, it will not be like what you see, like what happened in the coast or Sweda, but you will see it every day. There will be news, there's a PKK remnant arrested, another person is arrested for this. So there will be like a lot of arrest and security apparatus that will crack down on anyone who worked for anything related to the SDF. And also, I mean, there was like a very large force of people that worked for the administration or the SDF. So anyone can be arrested if the Damascus is allowed to take over these areas. I mean, there's also all these discussions that, the Kurds, they made the mistake that they take control of these Arab areas and they were like occupying these Arab areas. But a lot of people also forget that the SDF, they never wanted to go to Deir ez-Zor or Raqqa. They were actually aiming to connect Derik until Afrin. They wanted to make like a continuous zone on the border, which also includes, by the way, other groups, Arabs and Turkmen, etc. But they had no interest to go to Raqqa and definitely not Deir ez-Zor. But the only reason they did it, because otherwise the US would work with Turkey and they will take over Tel Abyad and cut the access to, they will cut the border between Kobani and the zone between Kobani and the Jazeera area. And that's actually what happened now after Damascus took over those areas. So I think there's this very narrative that, but also I find interesting, you have this narrative that it's some form of a popular tribal uprising against the SDF. I mean, the Damascus, they have been working on months to try to push tribes to turn against the SDF. And they were being threatening people by messages online. They've been talking to them like, we are coming. You have either one choice, either it's us or the SDF. So it doesn't mean that all these areas, they are like necessarily anti-SDF. Maybe before they were neutral, maybe they didn't like SDF, but it doesn't mean that all of them like HDS. I mean, there's a lot of force also involved, and it was not like a sort of, there's this narrative that it was just a tribal uprising and it was like all natural. I mean, this was all planned. Like when, for instance, in Deir ez-Zor, the so-called tribal uprising was starting, you had like ferries taking over like armored vehicles from the Syrian army into Deir ez-Zor. So it's not like that the thing. But one of the things that changed is that when the Assad regime was still there, Arabs in Deir ez-Zor, they didn't like Iran, they didn't like the Assad regime. So a lot of the Arab tribes in Deir ez-Zor, they basically were like, well, we don't like the SDF, but we don't like Iran and Assad. But now those tribes, they have switched. You know, they rather have to be, some of those tribes rather be under Damascus control than under the SDF because the Assad regime is not there anymore. But that doesn't mean that like the integration of SDFs with Arabs and Assads, they completely failed. Because even now, if you go to northern Syria, if you go to Rojava, I mean, when I was at the border or when there are some checkpoints, there are still many Arabs in the security forces. So, and that's also the reason I think there's now just a narrative that it was all like some sort of spontaneous uprising, but I really disagree with this this thing. And actually, in the past, the Kurds, they were using a similar tactic. They will carry out attacks on the SNA in Afrin, and they will say, "Oh, there's this popular group called the Afrin Liberation Front, and they're doing attacks on and we have nothing to do with them." But it was actually SDF and YPG. The Syrian army, the Damascus, the Islamist regime in Damascus, they're doing exactly the same. They're doing all this organization. It's all like Syrian army. It's all like corrected, all like controlled by them, and they're doing all these attacks on the SDF, and that's why it was also very difficult for the SDF to. So they, when they were like advancing on these areas, like in Tabqa, when, for instance, when the SDF withdrew from the area in Western Aleppo, according to an agreement with Damascus, they were actually attacked immediately by the Syrian army, and then they withdrew towards Tabqa. And Tabqa, they were actually resisting. And that time, the U.S. Army said, "Oh yeah, we asked Damascus not to attack this area between Aleppo and Tabqa. And you have to withdraw." And they were already standing on the gates of Tabqa. So then, basically, what happened is that it was very difficult for the SDF to hold off all those forces that were coming, and there were like sleeper cells carrying out attacks on the SDF in the back. So I think the reason that that the SDF basically crumbled in Raqqa and Deir ez-Zor, it's not like so simple as they bring it in the media. And also is the fact is that they actually withdrew most of the forces quite quickly from Deir ez-Zor and Raqqa in a sort of negotiated agreement with the US. And because even during all this war which is going on, there were still always talks going on with the US and mediators with Damascus. So I think the SDF actually chose not to fight for Deir ez-Zor because they knew it would be a losing battle. And that's why they withdrew most of their forces to other areas where they have more Kurdish population there. And for instance, in Raqqa, they actually withdrew from the city center, but they didn't withdraw from the military bases and the prison. And actually, they tried to defend the ISIS prison against the army coming from Damascus for a very long time. But they were basically surrounded, and there were many attempts to basically take them out. And actually, the SDF was hoping to evacuate those ISIS prisoners in coordination with the coalition, but the coalition refused it. And then actually, recently, Damascus took over the prison, and the SDF, they withdrew after like a long time of fighting. So I think there's like a big discourse that is going on. And I think that the ceasefire now, like 2 days ago, I thought the ceasefire would break down and there would be a big fighting. But now I think I'm a little bit more optimistic that the ceasefire will hold for the moment. But anytime the ceasefire can break down, because they will use any excuse. If they want, for instance, to break the ceasefire, they will just say, "Oh, civilians are killed," or something else. They will find something. I mean, with the Druze, for instance, they use some fake video of a guy allegedly insulting the Prophet Muhammad, and then they attack them. So also with the SDF, any excuse they will use if they want to break the ceasefire, they will do it. And also you should remember that there's also mixed Arab Kurdish villages between Qamishli and Derik area. So it's also possible that at some point, if the ceasefire break down, they're going to attack that area and cut the roads between Derik and Qamishlo, and then you have thousands of people stuck in Qamishli surrounded, just like in Kobani. Then we'll have 2 Kobanis, not just one. Also they will attempt then to also take the border crossing in Fishkhabur, and then they will also isolate those other Kurdish enclaves there. So I think the situation is like going to lead to a lot of displacement if the ceasefire breaks down. And I think the Trump administration, he said it himself, Trump, he wants to work with a strong man, not a weak person. And he said, we have to work with him, it's good. And we gave a lot of money to the Kurds. I don't know what money they gave because it was just some support, like some limited support for the SDF, some stipends, and for the prison, some support, but it was really limited because they didn't want to do anything to piss off Turkey. So I really don't know where this narrative is coming from, that they got billions of money. There's nothing like that. I mean, they had like limited money actually all the time. And also now it's also funny that like they say, oh, the SDF had all this oil in control and like why they didn't develop those areas. I mean, it's not that they could easily develop those areas because they were almost completely surrounded apart from the KRG border. So it was very difficult for them even to bring anything inside Syria from outside. And it's not that they had an airport or a harbor or something that they can bring in stuff like Damascus is now doing. I mean, they had
I've been there. Yeah, I've been in the region.
Support. And now they say, oh, it is discrimination against the Arabs. You know that in the past, most of the NGOs that were operating in Raqqa and Deir ez-Zor, not in Kobani, and almost all the money was going to Deir ez-Zor from the US. So it was not going to the Kurdish areas. There was no NGO was funded by the US that was helping reconstructing something in Kamishli or in Derik or in Kobani. Like Kobani, despite all the sacrifice they did, there was no support at all, nothing, zero.
I know, I've
mean,
been there, and when I saw the
US.
situation, it was not
They
good.
only put money in Raqqa and Deir ez-Zor. So, and that's
Yeah.
like always they're saying, oh yeah, but the SDF, they discriminated the Arabs and they didn't put any money. They did more money in the Arab majority towns was going in the Arab majority towns than in the Kurdish towns. And actually many Kurds now, they blame the SDF for that. They say like our people were dying, liberating those areas from ISIS, and now those people are attacking us. So what we get in return? Nothing.
Yeah.
So that's why it creates a lot of like also like enmity between Arabs and Kurds.
Yeah,
And
I
if the
would
ceasefire
like to
breaks
go
up,
to.
other problems.
I would like to now go to Mutlu, because Mutlu, you've been also following this from many years, and we always see your tweets come by. So please give me your point of view.
First of all, as a Kurdish American, I want to first speak it, then as an American. First of all, or as a human, first of all, the humanitarian situation is very, very dark, especially in Kobani, a city that has been inspiring the world, defeating ISIS. It has been besieged for, this is the 6th day, under a very cold weather, under snow. It has been besieged from 3 directions, west, east, and south, and the north is already the Turkish border that is closed for any kind of humanitarian convoy, humanitarian corridor. Today I received a video, maybe you folks saw it, the queue, the lineup in front of the bakery, the only functioning bakery, people are desperately just trying to get some bread. But the manager of the facility told me that they're running out of flour and no gasoline, mazot. So it's the matter of time that this is also going to be out of service. I just, while I was waiting, listening the other guests, I keep receiving calls, messages, videos. In one single home, 20, 30, 40 people just trying to survive, and kids are sleeping on the trunk of trucks, the back of trucks, 10, 20, 30. It's unimaginable, horrifying situation. Imagining the comfort of our home, how cold it is, and these people are out without water, without basic food, bread, and most importantly, under this cold. And a few minutes ago, about an hour ago, Kurdish Red Crescent made an appeal, urgently asking help, appealing to UNHCR and its new head, Berham Saleh, himself a Kurd, hoping that he will be the best person to understand the urgency of the situation. Vladimir briefly mentioned about the El Aktam prison. For days, even after lost control of Raqqa city, Kurdish forces still try to protect, safeguard the prison, El Aktam prison, that ISIS members, core ISIS members were held. Now, after the mediation of the US, the coalition, these fighters were allowed to leave earlier hours of today. They went to Kobani. It just kind of moral boost for people seeing the fighters, but they were themselves, those fighters as well, without food, water, and basic needs. So there was the expectation that the human corridor, humanitarian corridor, will be open, and people at least get some blankets, some food, basic needs, and that's whoever is watching this. You know, this is at least the least can be done to care about these children, women, elderly. Remember that Kobani is where ISIS defeated. That's why this city, the dark mind, people with dark mind, people with bad intentions hate that city, because that is the city defeated ISIS. And ISIS, we know what ISIS means for the world. we could know it more difficult because we were direct victims. But Kobani is significant in terms of humanity, in terms of U.S. too. The U.S. Helped. They liberated Kobani jointly, and seeing that now Kobani is besieged for days, a symbol city, and then there is no action. That's disappointing. That's disappointing. But it is. I'll develop on more why it's happening in Washington. But Kobani is not the only place that are in trouble. The Afrin in the IDPs for the third time they were displaced. They came when the last time the Shaba region fell. They had to move to Kobani, to eastern parts of Rojava, the Komishlo, Amude, Derik. Now these cities have, all cities have lots of IDPs, internally displaced people. So the problem is it's much bigger and serious. Yes, the Kurdish sentiments are strong. Yes, there's a kind of sense of emergency occurs all over, like in Washington as well. Twice, two protests in 1 week. One is going to be held in New York soon. We see that. But the important thing is that the international community should stand up, should move, because these people, the Kurds of Syria, have been your allies, have been fighting for you, fighting with you. Kurds are a pro-Western society. We all know, modern, embracing the ethnic and religious minorities. When they had power, they chose to power share. They value women. And now Kurds and other ethnic and religious minorities are forced to live in a dark age again. The previous speakers very correctly outlined. I don't want to repeat again. But whatever is presented to the world as Syrian government, I refuse to call it Syrian government. I call it interim Syrian government or Syrian interim government, because that's not a legitimate government, first of all. No election at all. So the naming is correct, how to name it. And it's clearly its practices so far, Jolani's practices, Murat, and you very nicely put it. I don't want to repeat again. So by doing some cosmetics, by training somebody, giving some training, you cannot turn a jihadist into somebody, change somebody that respects diversity. That doesn't work that way. And the practice so far has shown us that that's not working. It's not going to work, because first the Alawite, then the Druze, and now the Kurds. Kurds are receiving the biggest pressure, biggest blow, because Kurds are the strongest. Kurds are the most organized. So, and Kurds have been like a beacon of hope for the other minorities. Once Kurds are crushed, the understanding is that the others are going to easily submit, easily accept their fate. But like Murat said, Syria is a very rich country. Nadine also mentioned it. Syria is not a one-nation country. But Mr. Tom Barak repeatedly keep calling Syria Arab nation state, part of Arab nation. That's the problem that is originating from. You treat a country made of different ethnic and religious identities, you impose a single identity upon them. So what is the difference, Bashar Assad, than the current regime? Things are getting worse, no sign of improvement, but clearly it's getting worse, deteriorating. In this framework, it's important the world see as soon as possible that Syria is going to be a cradle, be a center of more bigger problems. And Syria lies in the heart of Middle East. The problems with Syria, Europe will, Vladimir mentioned it a few minutes ago. Not only refugee problem, but this militants, hardcore militants that never surrounded until the very end in Baghuz. I was in Baghuz myself. Most of these ISIS militants are the princes and their families. So, and some of them are at large. Nobody knows where they are. So where do you think these people are going to end up? Who can guarantee it's not going to be in Berlin, in Paris, in Brussels? So this is a serious problem. Yes, everybody is in the honeymoon mood. Everybody is thinking that, okay, Syria is not our problem. Let's get rid of Syria. Now they have a government. Let them handle it. We can get rid of our refugee problem. Germany, especially motivated. Some European countries are motivated that once Syria is stable, so-called stabilized, no more refugee applications. We can deport people. DR mentioned it. Many people believe how Syria is doing well. No, that's a delusion. Being delusional will not bring any good to anyone. Everybody must face this reality. Abu Ahmed al-Shara is Abu Muhammad al-Jolani. He is Heteshe. Heteshe is Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda is 9/11. Many friends, that my friends in American friends, we hear, they have the same view. But somehow President Trump was convinced that this guy is the guy. And a few days ago, I talked to one of the TV channels. I told her President Trump's trust is betrayed by Jolani, because Trump declared that he wants to give an opportunity for Syrians, and on his mindset, Syria is a homeland for different ethnic and religious groups, not for one Arab nation, but home for. But what we have seen, people are alienated. People are put that the otherization. They are others. You are the other. Alawites are others. Druze are others. Kurds are others. Yazidis are others. Women are others. How can you build a society? How can you build a country when you alienate, when you show these people hatred, show these people violence? How can you build a future? So that's why I strongly believe President Trump is misled. President Trump is his trust, his opportunity is wasted. And many people, from what I see, I interact, many people are upset, but many are worried, afraid to speak up. But yesterday's Wall Street Journal editorial was a great wake-up call. I think Wall Street Journal is somebody President Trump takes serious as well. We know where it stands. It's close to the business circles, finance circles, conservative journalists, and Wall Street Journal questions whatever Tom Barak is doing is not serving the U.S. national interest. Abandoning the Kurds.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, everything you said, and like the idea that it's an Arab state is already showing other minorities that there is no place for other ethnic and religious minorities, and that is why the whole conversation today is the one that we're having. I want to switch over to Mohammed. Mohammed, please introduce yourself, because a lot of the people here are journalists. Introduce yourself, because I don't know if you got the opportunity already, and please give me your view of what is happening here in DC, what is happening in Syria. 1 second, I think you are on mute. Give me 1 second.
Okay.
Yeah, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Well, thank you so much, Perry, for organizing this, and thanks to the Free Yazidi Foundation. I'm Mohammed Salih. I'm a non-resident senior fellow with the Foreign Policy Research Institute in Philadelphia, USA. And I typically write about Kurdish and regional affairs, for FPRI and for other think tanks and media outlets in the US and also around the world. Do you want me to proceed and give my perspective on the situation, or do you have like any specific question that I should address?
Thoughts?
Sure. Well, it is not really an overstatement to say, what we are witnessing at the moment and have been witnessing for the past couple of weeks in Syria has been really nothing short of catastrophic on various levels, political, humanitarian, and also security. I think at the moment we are facing, two major threats in Syria. One of them is a major threat to social and civil peace in the country. What is happening is not really just a confrontation between two, armed forces or two militaries. what is actually unfolding on the ground, given the the widespread dehumanization that we are also seeing on social media platforms from people affiliated with the government. A lot of them very well-known public figures, not just some bots or unknown accounts, but this kind of dehumanization that we have seen is a very dangerous sign that what we are witnessing in Syria today actually, is a disastrous state of societal breakdown. And what is happening, threatens and to a quite significant extent has become really an ethnic conflict whereby elements affiliated with the government, whether people in official government military uniforms or their tribal militias are openly inciting against Kurds and are using, all sorts of unbecoming and horrendous language, including, animalistic metaphors and language, that suggests clearly a jihadi extremist mentality by calling, the Kurds infidels and by claiming, Kurds and some of the other groups in the area are not actually originally Syrian, that they are, that they have migrated there, that basically, the kind of language that actually justifies and legitimates, a campaign of ethnic cleansing. So there are some really troubling signs that, that if the government is not going to halt its military campaign, that is where things are headed toward. And we're already seeing signs of that, the field execution, the beheadings, and threatening to basically sell Kurdish women who have been captured as sexual slaves. All of this is really extremely troubling and should be taken with utmost seriousness. It's very grave. These are not individual practices. These groups, whether during the days of their fight against the Assad regime, at the Syrian opposition, they have committed these kind of atrocities. They have done it over the past years since the fall of the Assad regime. They have done the same to the Alawites. They have done that to the Druze in the south. And, it's also just very clear that that is what they are planning to do to the, ethnic and religious minorities in Rojava and Northeast. And I think the two groups that are particularly in danger are the Muslim Kurds and Yazidis, given again the troubling signs that we see of ideological overlap between the Syrian military and its tribal militias with groups like ISIS and Jabhat al-Nusra in the past. So this threat to civil peace and the possibility of ethnic conflict through the incitement of the Syrian military and individuals basically supporting them on social media and on on official media actually in Syria. This needs to be taken very seriously. The other major threat that we are seeing unfold in real time is the threat of a jihadi resurgence of a resurgence of ISIS. And the region, the country, Syria, and the broader region, and potentially the broader world, having to deal with some sort of, ISIS 2.0. What we have seen again in terms of videos, which are not, disinformation from sides opposed to the government in Damascus, but video clips filmed and proudly published on social media by members of the official Syrian military and their, tribal militias, showing themselves very proudly, releasing these individuals who are believed to be ISIS prisoners or families of ISIS prisoners, in the camps in northeast Syria. And what is really very troubling, if you also look at those videos, is the sense of camaraderie that you see in the videos between these, elements of the Syrian military and the tribal militias with the ISIS elements who are being released. It is not, but there is no sign of this being the government trying to impose control on these prisons, right? Where everybody, the entire world knows some of the most dangerous extremists on the planet were being basically kept. What you see in the videos is that, elements of the Syrian military and the tribal militias, which are there, which are basically, now in control of those prisons, they are basically acting as liberators of these prisoners, which really calls into question, the entire wisdom of what is being allowed to happen in Syria today, and that really also highlights, the great responsibility that outside actors, in particular the United States, has to shoulder really today, because it is the major international power that has basically embraced the new government in Syria. And I think a lot of people, as a matter of principle, were not and are not opposed to giving Syria a chance. I think, the vast majority of people with, conscience and fair people around the world, did that. Syrians have been through a lot. They have been through hell, for the last 14 years of the Assad regime and the massacres that regime committed, and that that they deserve a chance to be able to build something new and build something better. And I think toward that end, President Trump, was commendably stepping forward and has been willing to give the government of Ahmed al-Shara a chance. And by doing that, he has really placed some trust in Shara. But what we are seeing at the moment is an absolute abuse of that trust that has been extended to the Syrian government by the US government and by President Trump himself. There is no way in the world that anybody could think that President Trump would be okay with this, campaign of release of jihadis, with the ISIS flag being openly and proudly hoisted in a place like Raqqa, or there is no way to think that any of these atrocities that the Syrian military is committing against ethnic and religious minorities in northeast Syria are actually being condoned or supported by the US government and by President Trump. So I hope, people in Washington, whether in the Congress, in the administration, are seeing, what is unfolding for what it is, a really uncondonable misuse and abuse of the trust that the President of the United States has placed in the Syrian government, the abuse of that trust by President al-Shara, and him really, signaling very clearly to the world that, despite all the claims and all the propaganda that has been launched by him and by some of his promoters in the West, that there isn't really any fundamental reform or change in his behavior. And entrusting the jihadis in the to be really kept under control and to be sort of kept under conditions where they would not be able to pose a threat to the world. Entrusting this task to Shara is really akin to, asking the proverbial asking, the fox to guard the hen house or the chicken coop, right? And what we have seen is really, extremely catastrophic, calls for, tremendous amount of concern in terms of the humanitarian consequences, in terms of the security consequences for the region. And this is something that should really push and propel everyone in Washington across the Western world, the region into action to put an end to what is happening.
Yeah, I want to just highlight the one thing that you mentioned, and like some of the most extreme jihadists are in or were in those prisons, and a lot of them are have already escaped. I just want to highlight that because this will go towards other countries. The ones that escaped will go and try to manage to Europe. So like people in Europe should be terrified that those who are hoisting the Islamic State flag back up again, the beheadings, the enslavement of women, the cutting of the hairs of women to show dominance over these women and power. That is what Europe and the United States and other countries, they should be afraid of seeing, that the Islamic State is regrowing. I've always said the Islamic State ideology never was defeated. It was militarily defeated by the coalition to defeat ISIS, which SDF was also a part of on the ground. But the ideology that they were trying to spread was still spreading, and that there is where the danger lies, right? These most extremist jihadists. I want to just turn to Amy. Amy, you were recently in Syria before all of this happened. You have studied about Syria for many years. Maybe you can tell us and the viewers about your thoughts and your view on this.
Thank you, Pari, for organizing this today, and I'm glad to be here with all of you. I was recently in Syria, just in late December, for about 2 weeks. I was able to travel to Sweda as well as to the northeast and also Damascus. And I guess I would just start by saying that, as I think was indicated, before, but it's worth highlighting that my fear is that, if we look at this from a bigger picture, that essentially the new government in Damascus, the interim government, is trying to implement the same type of centralized system that the Assad regime had, except now with a former Al-Qaeda leader in charge instead of Assad himself. And that this is going to be a problem for all of Syria, not just for the Kurds or the Northeast. This is going to be, if you create the same centralized system that does not allow local, any form of local self-governance or local security protection, that alienates people, that doesn't bring them in as equal partners, you are creating the same system that fueled the conflict, this horrific conflict back in 2011. And so that's why I would hope that the international community would sort of wake up and ask themselves, surely we know that recreating the Assad, an Assadist system, but with an former Al-Qaeda leader, is not a good idea. At the bare minimum, there needs to be protection for all Syrians. There needs to be equal citizenship for all Syrians. And there needs to be, local people should be able to elect their local representatives. The Druze in Sweda, immediately after the fall of the regime over a year ago, said, okay, we want a woman, Mohsena Mohathawi is her name, actually, to be the governor of Sweda. She was a Druze woman from Sweda. And Damascus refused. And instead they appointed an Islamist from Idlib to be the governor of Sweda. And so this is a pattern that we've seen all over the country. Whenever there's some effort for local people to say, this is who we want to represent us, it's simply, refused. And the only, I would say, successful example of peaceful compromise over the past year were these two agreements that Damascus had signed with the Kurds, the March 10 agreement and then the Aleppo agreement in April. And actually, the Aleppo agreement was proof that some kind of decentralization could work, that the two sides, the two main power blocks in Damascus and the Northeast, that they could compromise peacefully and work together. Because that Aleppo agreement allowed Kurds to maintain their local security forces. They merged the Asayish, the Kurdish police, and the government-aligned police. They, agreed to work together. They agreed to have shared checkpoints. Kurds could continue their Kurdish language education. They could continue to have their local councils, their co-chair system in Ashrafeh and Sheikh Maksud. And so this was proof that actually the two sides could agree and work together. And that's what gave me some optimism over this past year. And now I see that, the Kurds, although they had reason to be skeptical of Damascus, they put their trust in Damascus, in Aleppo. I mean, they agreed to withdraw the SDF, and then they were surrounded on all sides, only having the Kurdish Asayish left. And what I'm concerned about is that this offensive now against the Northeast has essentially opened up the specter of all kinds of other problems, right? But the sort of justification that they're using for this big offensive, right, is that, well, the SDF didn't meet the deadline by the end of the year, this integration deadline. Now, I would just like to point out that if you look at other cases of where armed groups have had to integrate after the end of some kind of civil war or conflict, for example, in the Balkans, it took 10 years. I mean, the average amount of time that it takes to integrate different armed groups is 5, 10 years, sometimes 15 years. The SDF were given 9 months, right, from March until the end of December. So that is an unrealistic timeline, even in a best case scenario, right? But we didn't have a best case scenario, right? I mean, let's say, even if there had been no massacres against the Alawites or the Druze, that was an unrealistic timeline for the SDF. But those massacres, understandably, increased their skepticism and increased the level of distrust. And so and I would also just, if I can make one final point about this rushed timeline that's been imposed on them from the beginning was unrealistic. Just like the timeline of this national dialogue that they had that lasted one single day, right? The national dialogue that Damascus organized on February 25th, which was supposed to be the national dialogue to bring Syrians together after the fall of the regime. No one was invited. None of the officials from Northeast Syria or from the SDF were invited. And it lasted one day. I mean, this is a joke. Other countries that have gone through post-conflict transitions, national dialogues can last for weeks, months, sometimes even years. I mean, it takes more than one day to resolve everything that has to be resolved after a major transition like this. And so these, to me, these are indications that this timeline about the national dialogue and about the integration has been, I think, based around political expediency and al-Shara's desire to consolidate power instead of actually genuinely trying to reach out and bring together Syrians to build a better future. I mean, as an outside observer, I think, to me, this is clearly, what's been happening. And now, over the past week, the offensive against the Northeast that's led to the ISIS detention facilities being opened, it's a nightmare. I mean, this is a complete nightmare. We can't, sugarcoat this. And I'm completely shocked that this is happening now. As an American citizen, for me, who has also traveled and spent a lot of time in the Northeast, but also as an American taxpayer, Ambassador Barak tweeted on Tuesday that the relationship with the SDF was like suddenly over. And that now it was going to be Damascus, they were going to be our security partners. But if Damascus, if that new army is supposed to become our partner, they have to go through Leahy vetting. And that, to my knowledge, has not happened yet. And given the abuses that I have seen, I do not want a single penny of my taxpayer money to go to supporting this new army in Damascus, given these horrendous violations that we've seen. But his tweet came out of nowhere, and I think does not actually reflect what other people in the US government are thinking, in particular CENTCOM. That's my sense.
Thank you, Amy. We also have today with us our friend Daler. He is a Yazidi survivor. He survived the Yazidi genocide in 2014 committed by ISIS. Daler, what are your views? I'm sure there's a lot that is coming back in your mind. Please give us your views and the things you are afraid of seeing in the future.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I'm talking in a library private room, so if there is any noise, please let me know and I will try to put the headphones on. But yeah, I'm a Yazidi genocide survivor. I was only 14 when the genocide happened, and I was in Sinjar Mountain, on Sinjar Mountain for 7 days. So this is a very traumatic moment we're going through right now, and it's really perhaps the second most tragic moment of my life when I think about what's happening right now throughout the region. But really what has happened to Rojava over the last few days in a very brutal campaign of assault, a group and an autonomous region that basically saved me and thousands of other Yazidi children just about 12 years ago. Now there has been a lot already said, and there is a lot that could be said in this painful moment. Really, we're all talking from a broken heart right now, more than even our rational brains, because it's painful. But I want to really just focus on the Yazidi issue in Syria right now. With the limited kind of information I have, there is a lot more I could talk about politically and views, but really that you all have already done that business. So let me cover what we know about what's happening to the Yazidis. Over the last week or so, since the attacks on Sheikh Maqsood and Ashrafia, many Yazidi community leaders, including Yazidi house leaders, Yazidi coordination sort of networks in Syria, the leaders have reached out to young Yazidi community leaders in the US here, and then I've been in contact with them as a PhD student, just trying to kind of connect them to Paris and others, but also to journalists and so on. And they're facing a really uncertain, threatening future right now, as of the testimonies I've heard from them. For example, in Aleppo, as of the start of the attacks, there were 1,400 Yazidis living there, as the community leaders have told us. And most of them were already forcefully displaced Yazidis from Afrin when the first assault started in 2018. And now some of them were originally from those neighborhoods, but they were also displaced once more in 2012 when the radical groups attacked the two neighborhoods. They mass displaced to Afrin. They came back to Ashrafia and Sheikh Maqsood mainly. And the community leaders tell us that once the attacks started, they described it as basically a massacre, as there was not really limit to the things that were targeted, including hospitals and schools. And we were talking to them, chatting with them during the attacks themselves, and they really described it as such. They also described seeing ISIS soldiers around, at least radical elements within the forces that attacked them. And many of them described it as something that really felt as threatening as what happened to their brothers and sisters in Iraq about a decade ago. Now 800 of those have been displaced from Aleppo, and they have gone to places where already the Yazidis were oppressed and under threat, with international reports on this in Afrin and other places. And 400 are in Aleppo and still trapped there, basically. And the people that were talking earlier now actually are refusing to talk, the ones that stayed in Aleppo, fearing their life and fearing that there is really, they can't talk anymore. But we have all their testimonies, but the ones in Al Jazeera in Northeast are still talking, but they're also fearing that they basically, that's coming to them too. Now in Afrin, for example, Gule Jafar, who is the leader of Yazidi Women Union in Syria, have told me that basically in Afrin, the groups that control there have been already engaging in what she described as a white genocide against the Yazidis, in which that when she visited Afrin and in coordination with some groups in Damascus, that the Yazidis in Afrin would not even be able to talk about their religion. Even talking to her was a fear for them, as they feared that they would be targeted. And she talked about how many Yazidis are pretending to be Muslims in Afrin and other areas controlled by the radical elements of the Syrian security forces. Now, that's really some of what I've gathered from our community in Syria. Others have talked about young men being separated at different instances from women in Afrin and other areas. Their phones being checked, whether that is for being Yazidi or whether they are related to SDF or so on. But those people are really being checked constantly, and some of them are fearing even talking to their relatives in Northeast. They're deleting messages and so on immediately because they don't want any association to be appearing as Yazidis. Final comment I would make on the Syrian issue. Now, Yazidis, even this last declaration from President al-Shara, which has been applauded by even some Kurdish leaders as progressive and so on, or at least limited progress in the issue. You have to look to the bayan, you have to look to the decree, which starts with describing the Kurds as Abna and Ahfad Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi, and in a very Islamic integration. So even if Kurds are being integrated, Kurdish-speaking people, into the Syrian system in any way, even as second citizen, it has to be within some kind of Islamic framework as Ummah, that it has been really, if you textually analyze the way they have framed this decree that Shara had done, has released regarding the Kurdish question, which means the Yazidis are not even included in this. If you really look deeply into it, it's only including Kurds as part of Islamic Ummah. And of course, it doesn't include any secular-minded Kurd either. Even if we see that as something applied, but if we look to the Kurds in Northeast and how they've been dealt with over the last week, even that's not being applied. And there's what could be described as elements of genocide against the Kurds too. I've already taken a lot of time, but can I make one last point, Perry?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, thank you. It's regarding Sinjar. The Sinjar question cannot be detached from Syria. If you look into the history of Sinjar, since colonial conflicts between France and UK, Sinjar question was always unresolved between the Syrian and Iraqi government, and which of the two parts it would be part of. You could look to history more deeply, and Sinjar has been always impacted since the establishment of the two states by what happens in Syria. The Ba'ath Party was always active in Sinjar through intelligence and stuff. After 2003, Sinjar region was a victim of the activity of Al-Qaeda across the border. If you look to 2007 attacks on Yazidis, which is the second largest Al-Qaeda attack after the tragic 9/11 attacks, it was conducted against the Yazidis bordering complexes of Tel Azzer and Siba Sheikh Khidr. But the reports are that the the explosive tankers came from Syria, for example. And in 2014 also, ISIS really, much of Yazidi genocide was launched from Syria, from Ba'aj and other bordering regions. And the Nineveh also collapsed due to sort of infiltration from Syria. So the situation in Sinjar is really threatening. I've talked to family and relatives. They are really fearing right now. There is a general fear among Yazidis in Sinjar that really they're preparing themselves to run into Sinjar Mountain already. People have started collecting food and so on at home. People are putting gas in their cars. They're preparing for a new escape in Sinjar, basically, especially with Rojava falling. The border regions with Sinjar that were connected to Northeast Autonomous Region have already collapsed under the radical element groups control, which all the way to Ya'rubiya, which is Rabi'a. So even the main road that connects Sinjar with Kurdistan region, the Syrian side has already been controlled by those groups. So if the security situation destabilizes in the region, it's very similar to the scenario of 2014, and people are feeling threatened. And there is a large already Iraqi focus on Sinjar region with security forces. Sudani, that was the first place they visited. So yeah, I mean, when we look to the Yazidi, the impact on Yazidis with regards to the situation in Syria, it has to do with Sinjar too right now. Yeah,
I think there is.
To say, but I'll stop there. Yes.
Thank you, Dalir. I think there is a big concern now also with the Yazidis in Sinjar that if ISIS gains strength again, whether it's ISIS, whether it's jihadists with a new name of their group or militia or whatever it is, that they can cross over to Sinjar and commit horrendous crimes that we're seeing right now also in Rojava. I do want to go back to Mutlu because Mutlu, I think you had one more point that you wanted to make, and I want to open the floor to everybody to just have a conversation. I think a lot of great ideas always come out of conversations, and we also, the floor is open for others to ask a question in the comments. We can see that from here, so if you have any questions that you would like to ask any of the guests, please do so. Mutlu, the floor is yours.
This interim administration has failed so far, is doomed to fail, because it's not uniting the Syrians, all ethnic and religious fabric of the Syria, but rather tearing down, tearing apart. I was mentioning Wall Street Journal editorial. If this interim government is capable of taking care of ISIS, dealing with ISIS, why that CENTCOM is rushing? CENTCOM is put in this weird situation to transfer these radical ISIS militants to Iraq, whereas with the SDF control, it was much safer, very low cost. This is another indicator that Shara and his administration, interim government, is not capable of doing so. Again, it is President Trump has been misled. His trust has been broken, and I think it is important that DR mentioned how some Congress member even have no idea what's going on. One thing I also noticed that there is a systematic disinformation campaign. I agree with that, because I saw some videos that that the Kurdish civilians are murdered in cold blood, but I see some videos that rise reversing it as if the Kurds are committing atrocities. Some regional countries are through media supporting these atrocities, directly or indirectly, willingly or unwillingly. So the sooner the better that Washington realizes it's better return. Amy mentioned that this is not the view of whole Washington. I agree with her. It is right now. It seems to be the dominant policy, but I also believe that this is not what Washington believes. This is not what the majority of Washington feels and thinks. It's just for the time being. The person running the Syrian file, the Turkey U.S. ambassador to Turkey, and many people are now in Rojava, Syrian Kurdistan, questioning his neutrality. his position as being an envoy. Again, since the U.S. media is also talking, the Congress is talking, I think this is starting to be seen more clearly. And as an American, I agree with Amy that I don't want taxpayers to go for the radicals like this to take over Syria. And now Diler talked about the trauma he's going through. I'm the first international journalist reporting about what happened in Shengal, August 3rd. I remember I was begging CNN, I was begging BBC, I was begging Sky News, guys, do something. I got some reports that something terrible are happening. Even before that, at my previous work, when I was working in an agency, I day and night, knowing that what happened, it happened in the watch all of the world. People were watching. Similar scenarios happening. This should be an eye opener. It's not going to stay with Syria. It's gonna spread around. Wake up call, never late. Today is better than tomorrow, and I'm positive that this honeymoon sweet talk and the delusional idea, people are going to wake up from this soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Mutlu. Amy, I know he was referring to a point you made, and just in general, like also as I mentioned before, I'm really concerned that we are now watching a lot of crimes being committed. There's a lot of misinformation that is going around. We need to be very vigilant against that, because this time and age of social media and the spread of news and how it is being spread, it is very concerning that someone can just say something and people think that that is true. So we all have to be very vigilant against that misinformation that is spreading, especially misinformation that is coming from think tanks, where you think that the information that someone who works there is spreading is truth. But unfortunately, we are seeing things being spread, like, for example, beheadings by SDF soldiers. I mean, let's be honest, this is not the way the SDF works or behaves itself. We know that this is the kind of tactics that Al-Qaeda uses, that the Islamic State uses. The beheadings of people come from that Islamic State ideology. So we need to be very aware of this. Amy, you have a few more last points to make?
Sure. I mean, I would just say, I fully agree that really this is both a war that's taking place on the ground, but it's also an information war. This is, it's like a full-on propaganda war that's going on now against the SDF. The official spokesperson of the Syrian Ministry of Interior in late December, and this was just one interview that he gave on Al Jazeera, referred to the SDF as the so-called SDF. Now, that might sound harmless, compared to some of the other horrific things that we've heard in other accusations. But if the official spokesperson, who's part of a government that's negotiating with the SDF, is intentionally trying to undermine them on Al Jazeera in this interview, where there was nobody from the SDF to speak for them. It's just the point of view from Damascus, and then these sort of subtle efforts to undermine the SDF that don't get countered. But we have also horrific examples of hate speech, and then you just have absurd accusations that are also made against the SDF or the Kurds. For many years, the Kurds have been accused of being separatists, and although they've always said, we want to be part of Syria, we want a decentralized system inside Syria, now suddenly people are accusing them of being pro-Assad, like the opposite of being separatist. So both can't be true at the same time, right? But it's like they can make people think they can accuse them of anything and somehow maybe get away with it. And it's really appalling to me that these insane narratives are then spread by supposedly reputable think tanks or analysts in the West, because that gives credibility to this sort of insanity. And then people on the ground who are literally running for their lives they are supposed to somehow verify this information, or the videos and prove or disprove. I mean, they don't. They're facing an existential threat to their communities, and yet they also need to somehow respond to this information war against them when they don't have electricity, right? And or they, there's a blackout in Kobani, for example. It's under siege again, similar to how Aleppo was under siege before the attack there started. So it's it's an incredibly disturbing sort of thing to watch, and I would call on everyone to assume their ethical responsibilities as analysts, and to reconsider these narratives, because people's lives are at stake here.
Thank you, Amy. DR, I don't know if you're still there. If you are still there, maybe you would like to give your last comments. You're on mute. 1 second. Can you unmute yourself? Can you say something? I can't hear you. No. Yes, we can hear you now. Go ahead.
Thank you. Well, my last comment is that there is a huge gap of misinformation here in Washington, D.C., and a lot of people haven't been briefed about what's going on in the region. I think the role of ourselves, like journalists and who are covering these atrocities and these attacks, we need to bring the right, verified information to everyone and let them have the right information about what's going on in the region and how these affiliated militia groups with the Damascus are committing war crimes and what they are doing on the ground. This is, I think, very important, and it's vital to the policymakers here in Washington, D.C., from the administration, at the same time from the Congress. Let them know what's going on in the region, and I'm sure that they will take an action against anyone who is committing war crimes. And one last thing, there is some people here in Washington, D.C., they are playing a very bad role. They're bringing misinformation and they're feeding to the people that this is the real information. And I know people from the very well-known institutes, very well-known think tanks, and they have really blurred the line between the think tanks and what they are doing in propaganda. That's why my call to everyone who's covering and who's monitoring this closely, please pay attention, please bring the right information to the right people, and to everyone, not only in the Congress, but from the media to the administration, then to the Congress, and to the people who are working in the think tanks, because there's a lot of misinformation, and this has impacted the narrative here in Washington. And hopefully there will be more briefings from the administration to the Congress, and the Congress to the media, and the media bringing more lights into these atrocity and violations against the minorities, not only the Kurds, everyone in Syria. We've seen this against the Alawite and against Druze and the Christians and the Kurds, Yazidis, everyone. So it's very important to pay attention to this, and it should be worked on, and it has to be stopped here, not somewhere else. Thank you so much.
I agree, and it is up to all of you, up to the people who are at home, to just make sure that, as DR said, when you receive any information, just try to verify that information. Even for us as an organization, sometimes you see things come by, and nowadays with AI and everything, it is a difficult environment to comb through the right information. And of course, with reputable organizations, institutes, you expect them to bring to you the information, the truth that is actually happening on the ground. So I hope we can just be very vigilant in that sense. I would like to thank the speakers today for having joined us for this conversation. I'm going to stay on for a few more minutes for one last message. Amy, Mutlu, DR, thank you very much. You guys can shut off the connection. Thank you. So for the viewers at home, I see that we had a lot of viewers on Twitter. That makes me really happy because, as you know, we are conveying a message here, a message of hope that people in Syria who are from ethnic and religious minorities are going to be protected by someone. As I said previously, for those who have no understanding of the region, have no understanding of Al Qaeda or ISIS or who the president is or was of Syria, I'm just going to repeat myself again. So I think it is very valuable information to know the background when we're talking about Syria. What are we even talking about? When we're talking about Rojava, who are we talking about? So, as everyone knows, Al Qaeda is the terrorist organization that was led by Osama bin Laden. I know a lot of Americans, a lot of Europeans have heard of that. Al Qaeda was responsible for the 9/11 attacks in New York. And shortly after that, a young terrorist from Syria who took the name Abu Muhammad al Jolani pledged allegiance to Al Qaeda and traveled to Iraq. And Jolani was a member of Al Qaeda in Iraq and was eventually captured by the US military forces in Iraq. He's spending several years in US detention there. When he was released, he eventually returned to Syria. However, he remained an Al Qaeda member. He was tasked with leading Al Qaeda in Syria. Abu Bakr al Baghdadi was leading Al Qaeda in Iraq. Eventually, Baghdadi transformed Al Qaeda in Iraq into ISIS, the Islamic State. And Jolani decided to remain with Al Qaeda, renaming it Jabhat al Nusra and later Hayat Tahrir al Sham. ISIS and Jolani's group fought each other due to disagreements. Nonetheless, Jolani was listed as a terrorist by the United States and Europe, and the US government had a bounty on his head up until recently. In late 2024, Jolani's HTS terrorists conducted a campaign against former Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, toppling his regime. And he began wearing a suit and ties and instead of military fatigue and began calling himself Ahmad Shara. He is the current president of Syria. So remember, former Al-Qaeda member is now the president of Syria. He is the one who everyone has been hugging and congratulating. He is a former Al-Qaeda member, now wearing a suit. He and his backers have made great efforts to portray him as a reformed terrorist, modern person, and a part of the new Syria that they envision. Remember, they are calling it the Arab Syria. The new Syrian military includes former ISIS and Al-Qaeda members and a variety of militias with lengthy histories of committing horrific violations. It is led by the former HTS terrorists. In the last year, these forces have committed horrific, unspeakable crimes against Alawites, then against the Druze, now against the Kurds, against the Yazidis, and the Christians. There is a massive disinformation campaign to blame these conflicts on the victims. But the truth is that this government, from the leader to the fighters, is an extremist government. On behalf of FYF, I am stating my view that this is, in fact, the Islamic State that Baghdadi wanted to create is now created by Jolani. Syria has become the Islamic State that they always wanted. They have tried to fool the world, but the actions in Syria, they show the truth. This is a terror regime, and we have tried so much to show everyone at home that this is the Islamic State that has been created. And I hope that with this information, you go back to your families and make sure that everyone knows around you that you are against what is happening in Syria against ethnic and religious minorities. I thank you very much for listening to us today.